Have you ever wondered why some people seem to attract opportunities almost effortlessly while others work endlessly and still struggle to move forward? Why two people can possess the same education, the same intelligence, even the same determination, yet experience completely different financial realities? Most people assume the answer lies in luck, timing, or external circumstances. They spend years searching for better strategies, better investments, better jobs, or better habits. Yet despite all those changes, their results remain remarkably similar. What if the real problem has never been your income? What if it has never been your skills? What if it isn't even your mindset in the way you've been taught to think about it? According to Florence Scovel Shinn, the greatest limitation a person faces is not found in the outside world. It exists within the image they silently carry of themselves. Long before your bank account reflects prosperity, your identity either welcomes it or quietly rejects it. This realization changes everything. Because if identity creates experience, then changing your life is no longer about forcing external circumstances. It becomes a process of becoming someone different internally. Before we continue, if these teachings resonate with you and you're interested in practical wisdom inspired by Florence Scovel Shinn, Neville Goddard, and timeless principles of abundance, consider subscribing to the channel. Every week we explore ideas designed to help you transform the way you think, speak, and ultimately live. And if you've ever felt that your life could become something greater than it is today, leave a comment saying, "I choose a new identity." That simple declaration may become more meaningful than you realize. Most people believe they make decisions consciously. In reality, they protect an identity. This is why someone who desperately wants financial freedom can continue making choices that guarantee financial struggle. It isn't because they lack discipline. It isn't because they don't deserve success. It's because every decision must first pass through the subconscious answer to one silent question. Is this who I believe I am? If your deepest identity says, "I am someone who always struggles," your subconscious will reject opportunities that contradict that story. Sometimes the rejection is obvious. You procrastinate. You hesitate. You convince yourself you're not ready. But often it's far more subtle. You undercharge for your work. You avoid taking healthy risks. You apologize for wanting more. You feel uncomfortable when people compliment your achievements. You become anxious the moment your finances begin improving because prosperity feels unfamiliar. The conscious mind celebrates growth. The subconscious mind protects familiarity, and familiarity almost always wins. This explains why lasting transformation feels so difficult. People attempt to change behaviors while leaving identity untouched. They create budgets without changing self-worth. They repeat affirmations while secretly believing nothing will ever change. They visualize abundance while emotionally identifying with lack. Florence Scovel Shinn repeatedly emphasized that words possess creative power. But words alone are not magic. Their creative force comes from the consciousness behind them. Two people may speak exactly the same affirmation. One experiences transformation. The other experiences frustration. Why? Because one is speaking from identity. The other is speaking against identity. Imagine someone standing in front of a mirror every morning saying, "I am wealthy." If deep inside, they still see themselves as someone who always struggles, the affirmation becomes an argument rather than a declaration. Their subconscious responds almost instantly, "No, you're not." Every repetition strengthens internal conflict instead of internal certainty. This is why so many people eventually abandon spiritual principles altogether. Not because the principles failed, because they attempted to install new beliefs without replacing the old identity that rejected them. Identity always comes first. Everything else follows. Think about the roles people unconsciously assign themselves throughout life. Some identify as survivors. Others identify as caretakers. Some become the responsible one. Others become the overlooked one. Many unknowingly adopt the identity of the person who must always sacrifice before receiving. Once accepted, these identities begin influencing every area of life. Money, relationships, health, career, confidence. Even luck appears to organize itself around identity. This isn't mystical in the sense many people imagine. It's psychological, emotional, and spiritual operating together. You naturally notice opportunities that match who you believe you are. You ignore opportunities that contradict your self-concept. The world doesn't simply respond to what you desire. It reflects what you consistently embody. Consider how easily successful people make decisions that seem impossible for someone living in scarcity. They negotiate without guilt. They invest without panic. They receive compliments without discomfort. They expect good outcomes. Many observers mistakenly assume these behaviors created their success. In many cases, those behaviors were expressions of an identity that already existed internally. The behavior wasn't the cause. It was the evidence. This distinction changes everything. Instead of asking, how do successful people act? Ask, who do successful people believe they are? Because actions naturally emerge from identity. Effort becomes easier when it feels consistent with who you believe yourself to be. Resistance disappears when growth no longer threatens your self-image. This is why forcing discipline eventually exhausts most people. They are attempting to behave like someone they do not yet believe themselves to be. Real transformation happens in the opposite direction. Become internally, then behave naturally. That is exactly what Florence Scovel Shinn was pointing toward when she spoke about faith, expectation, and assuming the good already prepared for you. She wasn't encouraging people to pretend. She was inviting them to occupy a new state of consciousness before physical evidence appeared. That requires courage because the external world rarely changes first. Identity changes first. Reality catches up later. And that waiting period is where most people give up. They interpret delayed evidence as proof that nothing is happening. In truth, something profound may already be unfolding beneath the surface. Every moment you refuse to return to your former identity, you weaken its influence. Every decision aligned with your future self strengthens a different internal foundation. Little by little, what once felt unnatural becomes normal. What once felt impossible becomes expected. And eventually, the external world begins reflecting what has quietly transformed within. The greatest shift in your financial life may never begin with earning more money. It may begin the day you stop introducing yourself to life as the version of you that no longer exists. The moment you begin to understand this principle, you also begin to notice something uncomfortable. Your environment often reinforces the identity you're trying to leave behind. People remember who you used to be. They remind you of your past mistakes. They expect the same reactions, the same fears, the same limitations. Even without realizing it, they interact with the version of you they have known for years. This is why personal transformation can feel lonely, not because you are losing yourself, but because you are outgrowing a familiar version that everyone, including you, has accepted as permanent. Florence Scovel Shinn often taught that your world is a mirror of consciousness. If that is true, then the resistance you encounter is not necessarily a sign that you're moving in the wrong direction. Sometimes, it is evidence that an old pattern is beginning to lose its hold. Imagine someone who has spent years believing they are bad with money. Notice how naturally that sentence slips into conversation. I'm just not good with money. I've always struggled financially. Money comes and goes. I'm not the type of person who gets rich. These statements sound harmless because they've been repeated so many times, but repetition gives them authority. Eventually, they stop sounding like opinions and start feeling like facts. Yet they are neither. They are simply identities disguised as observations. And the subconscious doesn't distinguish between a passing comment and a declaration of self. It listens, it records, then it organizes your perceptions around what you've declared to be true. This is why Florence emphasized the power of words. Not because words possess magic on their own, but because they reveal and reinforce the state of consciousness from which you are living. Listen carefully to your own language for just one day. Notice how often you describe yourself in limiting ways. I'm always late. I'm terrible at saving. I never finish what I start. Nothing ever works out for me. I can't afford that. Perhaps you've said these things so many times that they feel completely natural, but ask yourself a different question. Would the version of you who already lives in abundance say those words? Not because they are pretending, because they no longer see themselves that way. Identity determines vocabulary. Vocabulary reinforces identity. The cycle continues until someone consciously interrupts it. Most people try to interrupt the cycle by changing their circumstances. They think, once I make more money, I'll feel abundant. Once I pay off my debts, I'll finally feel secure. Once my business succeeds, I'll become confident. But this way of thinking places identity at the mercy of circumstances. Florence Scovel Shinn suggested something radically different. She taught that consciousness precedes manifestation. In other words, you don't become abundant because your circumstances improve. Your circumstances improve because abundance becomes natural within your consciousness. That doesn't mean denying reality. It doesn't mean ignoring financial responsibilities or pretending difficulties don't exist. It means refusing to let temporary conditions define permanent identity. There is an enormous difference between saying, I'm experiencing financial challenges, and saying, I'm a financially unsuccessful person. One describes a circumstance. The other creates an identity. Circumstances change. Identity quietly reproduces itself until it is consciously replaced. This explains why some people rebuild their lives after devastating setbacks, while others remain trapped by far smaller obstacles for decades. The external event is not always the deciding factor. The deciding factor is the identity they adopt because of that event. A business fails. One person concludes, I failed. Another concludes, that business failed. One identity becomes smaller. The other remains intact. The event was identical. The interpretation was completely different. Your subconscious responds far more to interpretation than to events themselves. This is why two people can experience the same disappointment, yet create entirely different futures. One carries the disappointment as proof of limitation. The other carries it as evidence of growth. Florence repeatedly encouraged her readers to expect good. At first glance, that advice sounds simple, perhaps even overly optimistic. But expecting good is not wishful thinking. It is an identity decision. It is quietly saying, I no longer identify as someone who waits for life to disappoint me. Think about how many people unconsciously expect problems. Before sending an email, they expect rejection. Before attending an interview, they expect failure. Before investing in themselves, they expect disappointment. These expectations don't merely predict the future. They influence behavior in the present. Someone expecting rejection speaks differently, walks differently, negotiates differently, takes fewer opportunities, protects themselves emotionally before anything has even happened. Expectation is invisible behavior, and invisible behavior produces visible results. This is why changing expectation without changing identity rarely lasts. If you still believe you are fundamentally unlucky, your expectations will eventually return to match that belief. Everything returns to identity. Always. Perhaps this is why genuine transformation feels less dramatic than many people imagine. Hollywood teaches us to expect sudden breakthroughs. One conversation changes everything. One morning you wake up completely different. Real transformation usually doesn't happen that way. It is often quiet, invisible, repeated. You choose different words today. You make one courageous decision tomorrow. You stop apologizing for your ambitions. You begin accepting compliments instead of dismissing them. You allow yourself to imagine success without immediately questioning whether you deserve it. None of these moments appear extraordinary on their own, but together they reshape identity, and identity quietly reshapes destiny. There comes a point in this process where you notice something surprising. You're no longer forcing yourself to think differently. The new perspective becomes automatic. You no longer remind yourself to believe in opportunities. You simply expect them. You no longer struggle to receive. Receiving feels natural. You no longer chase abundance from a place of desperation. You move through life with quiet confidence, trusting that what belongs to you cannot pass you by. That kind of certainty cannot be manufactured overnight. It grows every time you choose alignment over old conditioning. If this message has challenged the way you see yourself, take a moment to support the channel by liking this video. It helps these teachings reach people who may be trapped in limiting identities without even realizing it. And if you've recognized an old story you've been carrying for years, share it in the comments. Sometimes naming the old identity is the first step toward releasing it. The version of you that created your current reality deserves compassion. It learned from past experiences. It adapted to disappointments. It developed beliefs that once felt necessary for survival. But survival is not the same as expansion. There comes a season when the beliefs that once protected you begin limiting you. Growth requires recognizing when protection has become a prison, and that recognition changes everything. The question is no longer whether you are capable of attracting greater abundance. The question is whether you are willing to stop identifying with the version of yourself that believes you cannot. That decision cannot be made by anyone else. It happens quietly, internally, long before the world notices anything has changed. And yet, once that decision is genuine, the world eventually has no choice but to reflect it. The most remarkable part of this journey is that nothing truly new is being added to you. You are not manufacturing confidence. You are not creating worthiness. You are not becoming valuable for the first time. You are simply removing the layers of limitation that convinced you otherwise. Florence Scovel Shinn believed that every individual has access to an infinite intelligence, a divine order that is always ready to express itself through those who are willing to align with it. But that alignment cannot happen while you continue introducing yourself to life through fear, lack, and limitation. You cannot consistently expect abundance while secretly identifying with scarcity. Sooner or later, one of those two identities will prevail, and the one that wins will always be the one you rehearse the most. This is why your daily thoughts matter. Not because every single thought instantly creates reality, but because repeated thoughts become beliefs, repeated beliefs become identity, and identity quietly directs the choices that shape your future. Your life is not transformed in one extraordinary moment. It is transformed through ordinary moments repeated with extraordinary consistency. Each time you refuse to speak against yourself, each time you choose possibility instead of resignation, each time you respond from the person you are becoming instead of the person you have always been. These moments seem insignificant, yet they accumulate. One decision becomes a habit. One habit becomes a character. One character becomes a destiny. Perhaps you've been waiting for a sign that your life is about to change. Maybe this is the sign. Not because this video possesses any special power, but because it has invited you to ask a question that few people ever dare to ask. Who have I been believing myself to be? Because once that question becomes honest, another one naturally follows. Who would I become if I stopped carrying that old identity? Imagine waking up tomorrow without the weight of the labels you've repeated for years, without calling yourself unlucky, without seeing yourself as someone who is always behind, without assuming that success belongs to other people, without measuring your future by your past. How would you think? How would you speak? How would you make decisions? How would you respond to opportunities? The answers to those questions reveal something profound. The future you've been searching for may not require a new opportunity first. It may require a new identity. The world often teaches us to chase more, to earn more, achieve more, accumulate more. But Florence Scovel Shinn pointed toward a deeper truth. Life changes most dramatically when consciousness changes first. The outer world follows the inner one, not instantly, not always in the way you expect, but consistently enough that those who understand this principle begin living differently. They stop waiting for permission. They stop introducing themselves through old failures. They stop allowing temporary conditions to define permanent possibilities. Instead, they quietly assume the consciousness of the person they are called to become. And little by little, life begins responding in kind. So before this video ends, I'd like to leave you with a simple challenge. For the next 7 days, pay close attention to every sentence that begins with the words, I am. Notice how often those words describe limitations instead of possibilities. Then, gently interrupt the pattern, not by pretending, not by denying your current circumstances, but by refusing to define yourself by them. Remember that circumstances are temporary. Identity is a choice that can be renewed every single day. If today's message resonated with you, make this your first declaration of that new choice. Write in the comments, I choose a new identity, not as a slogan, not as wishful thinking, but as a conscious decision to stop carrying a version of yourself that no longer serves your future. And if you found value in this message, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every week, we explore timeless principles inspired by Florence Scovel Shinn and other great teachers, helping you transform your thinking so you can transform your life. Thank you for spending these moments with me. Until next time, remember this: your bank account is not the truest reflection of your potential. Your past is not the truest reflection of your future. And the person you've been is not required to become the person you'll always be. The moment you change the answer to the question, who am I? You begin changing the answer to every other question your life will ever ask. Because prosperity does not begin when money arrives. It begins the moment you stop identifying with the version of yourself that believed it never could.